As you walk through the dilapidated crypt, bodies of cultists littering the floor, surrounded by spilled glasses from their poisoned wine. You hear a sound from above. The long, warm strand of saliva caresses your shoulder like a fevered hand. I knew I should have read the campaign setting. Michael Schumacher is far too high concept for a horror campaign. Horror, dread, terror. Nothing quite hits the spot like a horror-themed D&D campaign, and the community tends to agree. It's no coincidence that the community widely regards Curse of Strahd as one of the best D&D modules in history. And having completed myself as a DM, I tend to agree. The way that horror games get you invested in your player, the character, the stakes of the world, and the campaign setting are unparalleled. But it can be quite a daunting task. Very easily overdone, or easy to go too toned down, and it's a really, really fine balance to try and strike. So here's my tips for running a wonderfully terrifying horror-themed D&D campaign, and making sure that that horror setting is just right in time for Halloween. While I love the sense of hopelessness and dread and terror that horror campaigns can bring, fighting against all manner of evil monsters, creatures, zombies, and big brother-like governments that are pressing down against you. Sometimes it becomes tiring, and players can get fatigued from constantly fighting and feeling like they're always on the run, never having a chance and just slogging through waves and waves of endless mud. As a player, what's the point in playing and getting invested if there's no chance at a good ending? You'd be forgiven for just letting yourself sink. That's why when you run your horror campaign, make sure that you keep little pockets of hope dotted around the area. This can take many forms, whether it's a village that is currently fighting against the plague, or there's a hero NPC fighting against all the other odds as everyone else has given up. Or maybe there's an area of life where the forest still stands lush because of the efforts of a good-hearted witch. And beyond even that, maybe just a silly, goofy little NPC that the party can bring along, or keep up with every now and then, bringing some light in from the darkness. This serves to keep your players hooked to the idea of the campaign, as there can only be stakes if there's something that can actually be lost. And if there's nothing, then you might as well give up. And that's one of the mistakes that a lot of new horror-themed DMs make, is just making it too unbeatable. And there's no joy in that. Worlds never just exist. But in some settings, you can get away with having no real history or backstory behind a world. A whimsical woodland filled with fey creatures can get away with having no history or records, because who's there to record them? But an evil world that has just existed that way forever feels a lot more shallow, particularly compared to one that was once great but has since become tarnished due to some person or event. Not only is this important because it gives your players something to uncover about the world that they're currently living in, but it also gives a sense of reason to the horror. This is important because the NPCs in the world, the setting, the backstory, the arcs, the buildings and towns, they can all allude to something greater than once existed, but has since been lost to a powerful evil. And an abandoned town filled only with scarecrows is made all that much more horrifying when you realise it was once a place of healing. It brings into question, how did the village get abandoned? What happened to the healers? And why are those scarecrow's eyes following me? Horror games are renowned for their exceptional sound design. Amnesia, Outlast, even FNAF spring to mind. They all use ambience, sound cues, and silence to their advantage, all in an effort to instill terror, dread, and fear when the right moment arises. This can be mimicked in Dungeons and Dragons too. I use a combination of YouTube for ambient sound, Pocket Bard for sound effects, and tactical use of my mute button, all to create the atmosphere I'm going for in a given moment, whether that's an approaching horror, a jump scare sting, or just letting your players simmer with the thoughts as they contemplate the consequences of their actions. This does require a bit of forethought and research to find the right ambience and sound effects. It also draws on a lot of multitasking in your game as you juggle between narration, improvising on the fly, and world building and lore, and then also having to think of sound effects and what ambience you're going to use. And keeping different windows open on your Internet Explorer for the various sound effects that you're using can be a really helpful way of navigating that. For combat, I tend to steer all the way over towards Bloodborne music, really staying within that Soulsborne genre. Sister Amelia, Lawrence, and Ludwig's themes are all absolutely perfect for Eldritch horror campaigns, and I use them in Strahd all the time. In a horror campaign, it's really important to nail down exactly what the themes of the setting you're going for are. Is it eldritch horror, undead, a plague, a dystopian government that bears down on its citizens, or something entirely different in itself? Whichever you choose, or the various combinations of them, it's important that you nail the theming of that subgenre and keep it relatively consistent. If overdone, it can become a bit of a mismatch of different genres and descriptions that becomes quite messy. To give you a bit of an example of what this might look like, the ancient evil of your land started when a necromancer delved far too deep into an ancient dungeon. Then a plague would make far more sense than an oppressive government. It's about trying to find things that match the same sort of tone. And similarly, if you try and cram every single subgenre into the same village, then one's going to overshadow the other, or they're all just going to become blurred into one ugly mess. And your campaign will lose its coherence. And that's not to say that you can't have different subgenres mixed together into your campaign setting. Plague mixed with an undead horde works quite well, but an oppressive government mixed with an interstellar invasion, mixed with a plague and an undead horde, a survival horror all in one can prove very fatiguing for you and your players. Maybe separate them out into different campaigns or one-shots if that's something you want to do. It can also help narrow down your descriptions for your areas. You can more easily access exactly the descriptions and vocabulary that you want to use to evoke whatever feelings it is that you are after from your players. Imposing buildings, propaganda on the streets that are also lined with starving villagers for a dystopia, or streets filled with disease, puddles of vomit and sputum, and rats roaming around for a plague. Do you ever get the feeling of someone watching you with unseen eyes? Or a chill down your spine, or the sense that someone may have perished where you're standing many, many years ago. I remember going down to a dungeon in a castle in England and walking through one of the execution chambers, and the feeling that that evoked was something that I can only describe as being pure dread. So use those feelings in your game. Often in D&D we describe the physical attributes of a land, what we can see, smell, taste, hear, touch. But what about the feelings that are evoked by walking through a dark forest? Yes, you can see the darkness of the trees, the fog, you can maybe hear that there's nothing, silence. But how do the players feel? How do the characters feel? Do they feel like they can feel hands across the backs of their necks or eyes watching them from behind the trees? Those feelings of introspection that we get as humans. Are they standing at a site that makes it feel like 1,000 lives were snuffed out here not too many years prior? Or the sense that something can smell your dread and perspiration? It doesn't always have to be the foretelling of an imminent threat, just enough to keep your players on their toes. Maybe it amounts to nothing, but that one time that it does, you can really get them. And look with your horror games this spooky season. Comment below if you use any of the tips that you saw in this video. And don't forget to like if you enjoyed, and see you next time.